Yes, the meeting is being recorded. Everybody be on your best behavior. And if I may please request sharing privileges. All right, so away we go. And as always, I want to start by thanking you for welcoming me into your communities, into your homes. And I know that an hour out of your day is a lot to ask. And I thank you for spending it with me. And today we're going to tackle an interesting topic, which is the brain gaming and social media. And you would think that after a year at home, the last thing that kids would want to do is look at a screen. But the latest research says that the kids are still very much interested in technology, primarily passive, downloading and watching as communication through text and social media and other means were primarily done while at school. But really, interest has not dissipated. So we're going to take a look at this, and we're going to take a look at the neuroscience of the brain gaming and social media. And as always, we are going to remember the themes that are recurring throughout Parent University and recall the interplay between head, heart, and hands. And of course, in the middle of head, heart, and hands, where you see the intersectionality and you see the overlap, you will see high performance. And when we talk about high performance, one might assume we're solely talking about academic performance, but we're also talking about peace of mind, love of learning, competence, and confidence. So any piece of advice that I offer, any insights or approaches that I suggest will all return here. So let's see, what exactly are we talking about? We're really moving from the brain where we started to behavior where we were last time, and we're looking at a new layer which presents a sort of dynamic interplay between the two things. And it has to do with digital literacy and technology addiction. And this may look like a familiar graphic to you. And we look at age and we look at experience and we look at the brain's plasticity and our ability to change in response to experiences. And as you can see, we are most able to do that when we are toddlers, and our plasticity dissipates somewhat as we age. Our ability to change dissipates. So again, you can teach an old dog new tricks, but it will take much longer and will likely irritate both you and the dog. So the idea here is that we want to develop good habits early on. It's much harder to unwind bad habits and learn new things. So when we talk about doing this, we can also talk about how we do this in the digisphere, and we can think about where our digital responsibility begins. You will see a big vertical line that cuts just before 20, and this is really the age at which we are talking about. Now, when we talk about digital citizenship, when we talk about digital literacy, we can look at it in the elementary environment. And I mention this because I know many of our families have multiple age groups who are living under one roof. So when we talk about the elementary environment, really what we're talking about is safety online, and really helping kids understand that the online world and the real world are connected and comprised, for the most part, and I'm underscoring for the most part, of real people and real communities. Because sometimes, as you know, the what you are seeing is automatically generated through bots. But really, what we're talking about is establishing a solid foundation upon which to build and sound habits early on for engaging the online world. And somebody like me, who is in his early hundreds, really had no basis for that because the computers that I used ran off cassette tapes. So I don't really have a strong footing in that, and had to learn very late in life. And what we know is that when we talk about these critical foundations, that it's not just parents alone, it's parents and teachers working together. And the purpose is we serve as gatekeepers, guards, and guides. So navigating this wild world. Now, when we move into the secondary environment, when we move into middle school and high school, sometimes upper elementary, we take a bit of a deeper dive because we know that issues become more complex. There are implications for the future. These are things that we put out there that last in perpetuity. And what we want to be able to do is not only produce critical consumers of data, but also critical producers of data. There's nobody out there who's sort of in control of cyberspace going, well, that's going to embarrass you when you apply for a job 40 years hence. And of course, just like in the elementary level, this can only be achieved with us all working together. So when we talk about digital citizenship in the secondary realm, we're talking about privacy. We're talking about ethical dilemmas and civility, cyber hygiene and the digital footprint, the footprint that you leave behind when you log on to things. Digital health, both physical and mental, and we'll look at things like influencers, and we'll look at things like binge watching to see what we're talking about here. Digital literacy and cybersecurity, responsibility, and situational awareness. So this is really what we're talking about. And what's interesting about all of this is that in the 1940s and 50s, we had the same concerns as we do today, but those concerns were about television. Now, some of you in the great large E3 viewing audience may remember Ann Landers. And Ann Landers was an advice columnist. She had a sister named Dear Abby, and people would write in to the newspaper and she would respond with advice. In the 1950s, Ann Landers said, television has proved that people will look at anything rather than each other. And if you think about your family dinners around the table where everybody has one of these and everybody is together but sort of in their own worlds, you'll see that sort of same thing. So a lot of the concerns that we have about technology in the internet now are the same things that we had about television in the late 40s and early 50s. But are we really talking about the same thing? Is our current access to information more dangerous than it was in the 50s, 60s, and 70s? And I remember when this came um, to a point during the Vietnam War where you were actually seeing combat in real life and you were seeing body bags coming home. And it was very alarming. And there was a lot of worry during the 70s and 80s about latchkey kids, these kids who would come in and they would really, the television would be their babysitter. And there was a great deal of concern about people becoming couch potatoes and things like that. But when we think about technology, when we think about gaming, when we think about social media, is it an addiction or is it a vehicle that amplifies our pre-existing addictive tendencies? So you think about eBay and online auctions. So is eBay problematic as a technology or is it problematic as an addiction in itself? And that's something we are going to explore. And we are going to actually look at what we mean by addiction because it has a very precise definition. And when we talk about addiction, we're talking about a condition in which a person engages in the use of a substance or in a behavior for which the rewarding effects provide a compelling incentive to repeatedly pursue the behavior despite detrimental consequences. So you know bad things are going to happen, but you have a compulsion to keep doing it. We know that addiction affects our reward systems. It affects our reinforcement systems, motivation and memory. All of those systems of the brain are impacted as well as executive function. You may remember from our work in the fundamentals of neuroscience, we talk about executive function as being our decision-making body. And the addict may be actually unaware of what the detrimental impacts are to self or others emerging from behaviors. That is the clinical definition of addiction. And what does it look like in practice? So when we try to understand what addiction does, we may remember some of this from our workshop on neuroscience. Now, when we do things that further our survival, even things like eating and drinking. So it's not just solving a crossword puzzle or doing your homework or finding a new way to work. Um, Whenever we do things that are designed to enhance our survival, we release dopamine, which is the neurochemical associated with reward, and we get feelings of pleasure. And this is designed to encourage these behaviors to be repeated. And we're going to talk in just a second about the neurochemistry of persistence. So when you do things that further your survival, eating and drinking produce normal levels of dopamine, and it doesn't really impact the microarchitecture of the brain. Now, what drugs and other stimuli do is they mimic dopamine, or they cause overproduction and flood our neuroreceptors with dopamine. That is why when you look at addicts, there's always more and more needed to feed the addiction just to get to where you're feeling okay. And one of the reasons that this happens is because these stimuli mimic dopamine. So our brains just shut the faucets off, and it is harder to feel good without the drug or stimuli. So we think about addiction in terms of drug addiction or alcoholism or gambling addiction. And this is sort of the way that it happens. We can talk again about the neurochemistry of persistence, and we talk about eating and drinking. Now, you do not get neurochemically rewarded for breathing. That is on autopilot. But if you think about the neurochemistry of persistence, what you get is a wonderful neurochemical cocktail: endorphins that give you a sense of euphoria, dopamine, which stimulates our prefrontal cortex, our decision-making part of the brain, oxytocin, which is the love and trust and relationships chemical, and serotonin, which gives us a sense of well-being. So every time we do something that enhances our survival, we are provided with that. And we know that conversely, negative feelings produce adrenaline and cortisol, which put us in to survival mode. So we're always going to go after those things that give us this wonderful neurochemical cocktail that make us feel good. Um, Now, there's not a good degree of agreement about whether there is such thing as technology addiction. Researchers don't agree. Some will say this is just overuse. It does not meet the clinical definition of addiction, although there is a shopping addiction and there is a gambling addiction. Nobody really agrees. But what are we talking about? We're talking about excessive or poorly controlled preoccupations or urges regarding computer use and internet access that leads to impairment or distress. Now, we talk about a high comorbidity, and comorbidity is just a fancy way of saying when you see this, you also see that. So when we look at this idea of internet addiction or overuse, we also see things like affective disorders, depression, anxiety disorders, and sometimes we'll see ADHD as well. And this is a perfect representation of being together, but being in your old world, in your own world, this picture. And it's interesting that these devices are actually designed to make the world a little bit smaller, but actually have put us into our own worlds when we're with one another. So what are we talking about when we talk about technology addiction? We're talking about things like video gaming, online gambling, eBay, online auctions or shopping, excessive social media use, excessive texting, tweeting, or abuse of similar applications, smartphone overuse. And it's really also refers to obsessive and compulsive online behaviors that have biological, genetic, and environmental factors, nature and nurture. We see that there is concomitant anxiety, depression, sleep problems, and you'll see a lot of similar traits to shopping addicts, impulsiveness. And we see that there's going to be an intersection between shopping addiction and technology addiction when we're going to look at things like Amazon. In terms of personality, it's interesting. There's self-esteem issues, and a lot of these are people who crave social interaction, but not in person. So this environment in which we live right now, where everybody's on screen, is just a boon for them. But what's happened, what is interesting is that if you think about applications like Facebook, they have fundamentally altered our understanding and our definition of friendship. Because if you think about the people with whom you associate on Facebook, we call them friends. So now we have kids who are quantifying friends. So instead of the value of friendship being relational, it's more transactional. I have 459 friends, half of whom I've never met, but that's how many friends I have. Now, when you think of the life of an influencer, and we're not going to go into that deeply right now, when you think about followers and generating followers and the mental and physical exhaustion that it takes to do that. And we'll also talk about applications like Instagram, where everybody seems to be living better lives, having better food, knowing better people in these elaborately staged and curated photos, which also contributes to fear of missing out. And when we talked about adolescent behavior the last time, we already know that they've got a lot going on without having to deal with this. But we'll take a more of a look at that when we move forward. But I want to give you a few statistics, some of which may surprise you, some of which you may have already intuited. Now, the average person spends at least 2 hours per day on social media. For teens, this could reach 9 hours per day. Now, it doesn't mean that they are starting at 8 and stopping at 7. It's like a full workday, but you can imagine even just every now and then looking down and responding. That is a lot of time spent. We know that at least 3.1 billion people use social media around the world, and about 210 million suffer from internet or social media addictions. We also know that teenagers who spend 5 hours per day on their phones, so it's connecting through social media rather than looking things up or navigating somewhere, they are twice as likely to exhibit depressive symptoms as those who spend 1 hour or less. It is absolutely mentally and physically exhausting. We know that 71% of people sleep next to their mobile devices at night. You know who's among those 71%? Me. And what's my excuse? Well, it has an alarm on it. So I don't have to have an alarm clock that goes bzzz or figure out the radio. I can just tell it to wake me up at a certain time. But I will ask you, when you have your device lying next to you at night, what else is it doing? It doesn't go to sleep. What does it do? Well, if you have notifications, every time something happens in the world, it gives a little buzz and an eerie blue light shoots up. Now, we know that teenagers need the most sleep of any of us, at least a good 8 to 9 hours of sleep. Now, imagine every time this rattles and you get up, you look what it is, you try to get back to sleep, you can't because you've been knocked out of REM. So you start, and by the time you know it, it is morning. 10% of teenagers check their phones 10 or more times per night. Now imagine what that is like, and imagine what that does to sleep. We know that 71% of teenagers admit to hiding or concealing online behaviors, and I'll bet that number is higher. All we're counting are those who have admitted. We know that about 50% of those using smartphones when they were driving are accessing social media. So they're not navigating, they're not seeing if their orders are ready, they are accessing social media. And this has become so prevalent that new cars, if you buy a new car, they have a digital interface that will read you your texts. They actually have whatever's on the digital interface in the car, where you have a touchscreen and you never have to have it leave your side. 90% of drivers admit to using smartphones behind the wheel. Now, this is a little bit dubious because I know that is illegal to do. I don't know who would be admitting it. But it's very easy to do when it's just sort of lying by and you have a cheeky glance and you look down, and that's all it takes. And we know that over 240 million Americans, 74% of all of us, check Facebook daily. That's Facebook. Can you imagine things like Snapchat, things like Twitter. I mean, it can consume all of your time. And I don't know about you, but you really just don't go and check social media. You don't just go and say, I'm going to just take a quick look and then I'm ready to go. You see that somebody likes your picture or somebody is sad today, and you wind up spending hours and hours and hours just sitting there. Um, this may have changed somewhat as the result of going remote during the pandemic, but not really. We know that at least 25% of teenagers report that they have been victims of cyberbullying. We know that more girls participate, 59% of girls versus 41% of boys, and 81% of teenagers believe that it is easier to get away with cyberbullying than it is to get away with face-to-face bullying, which is absolutely true because you can conceal yourself. And it is quite different because these are things that last. These are things that spread virally. This is not to say that face-to-face bullying is any better. It is not, but the nature of this is different. It is more pernicious. 25% of teenagers admit to sending explicit texts or photos, and 28% have been unintentionally exposed to pornographic materials. So these technologies, that we use to communicate or look things up or stay in touch, really have different shades to them. What has it done to bullying? Well, it's democratized it. It's much more relational and it spreads virally. There is cyber drama, which you can imagine are intensive skirmishes that conclude after a brief exchange. But we're finding nowadays that these spread, these last, even people who are not involved, people from other states, people from other countries, somehow get involved. And what are we talking about here? We're talking about kids who are suffering in silence on the one hand, and on the other hand, there's safety behind the screen. It's much easier to do this sort of stuff when you are anonymous or when you are behind a screen. What kind of things are we talking about? We're talking about things like flaming, things in the heat of the moment, harassment or cyber stalking, which escalates and becomes more obsessive, impersonation. So not to get credit cards or access to bank accounts, but stealing passwords, hijacking identities, using them to humiliate or embarrass. Denigration, this idea that we circulate publicly or by text, or outing, so sharing secrets online and publicly. Bullying is a lot different now than when I was in high school. And I'm sure for our both our parents and practitioners and administrators, it is much more complex and much more unwieldy, especially if you don't know what's going on in the outside. Now, here's something interesting. Smartphone users, and I count all of us among them, check our devices at least 85 times per day. And I will encourage you to follow yourself during a day and count the number of times you pick up the phone and look at it. Doesn't mean you have to look at it for a long period of time. Just pick it up, interact with it. And we know that social media sites and gaming sites and online shopping sites employ legions of neuroscientists, sociologists, and psychologists. So, we may look at things like Facebook, or we may look at, even way back when with MySpace and LiveJournal. Well, they're just very innocuous ways for us to keep in touch with classmates. And I remember many years ago, I had a friend, and we were at a political event, and he said, there's this thing coming out called Facebook where you can catch up with your friends from high school. And I said, nobody's going to use something like that. Who would want to do that? Well, proved me wrong. But these sites are purposefully designed to monopolize your time and attention. And we do this using something called called the validation loop, where a sense of insecurity is created. You become validated, you are rewarded. So you're following the neurochemistry of persistence, and then insecurity is created once again. Now, let's take an example. I am sure that many of you, either present here or in the viewing audience, have probably purchased something from Amazon.com. The big vans with the smiley face. I think my Jeff Bezos probably has a picture of my wife hanging in his office. Even when she is away, things just keep arriving. She has stuff on auto deliver, and I'm just constantly getting notifications. It's time to pick up Amazon stuff. So let's say what's something innocuous? Well, let's say I want to buy a tie. I want to look nice for the E3 parent university, and I want to get a new tie. So that is my sense of insecurity. That is something that I need. I've been watching TV. I've been looking at the fashion magazines, and I think I got to have something like that that creates a need in me. So I go onto Amazon and I type in, regimental striped tie, and the world opens up before me, as it was a great cave filled with treasures. I'll type one thing and look at all of these options, and you get an interesting sense of being the master of your domain. You're in control. You can have whatever you want just by clicking a button. So my insecurity is relieved, and it gives way to a sense of validation in which I can select from what I want, and then I find the one that I want, and I click to buy, and I feel a sense of reward. There is the neurochemistry of persistence. There's all that wonderful neuroscience, neurochemical rewards coming at me because I solved the purchase the tie problem. So I'm feeling great about that. But then my sense of reward dissipates, and it creates a new sense of insecurity. The great thing about Amazon is you can follow whatever you buy. And not only that, if you say, well, I cannot wait for 3 days to get my purchase. I want next day delivery, and you can order next day delivery. And it gives you a sense of empowerment. It gives you another sense of reward. And as you are developing the sense of insecurity, you can actually track your tie as it goes from place to place, sort of a tour de tie, if you will. You can follow it along and get another sense of reward there. So, you wait and you wait, and you can see that it is coming to you, and you finally get the notification, and you feel exhilarated. You want to go pick it up. You go and you run and you get it. You open the box, you rip it open, you pull out the tie, go, oh, okay, and then you go hang it up. But the great thing about sites like Amazon is that they are good friends of yours, and they know what your tastes are. And so they'll say, hey, if you like this, you're really going to like this, and you're really going to like this. And it just creates a sort of a, a manifold validation loop issues. When we look at something like eBay, when we are talking about online auctions, now we can add a sense of competition to it. So now it's not just I'm going to buy something, but now we are, having a duel to the death to get it. I paid $3,000 for one tie, but I won. So it plays on our predatory nature, our competitive nature, our most primal nature. So these sites know what they're doing. And if you just can't wait, you can just click and buy it now because I have that kind of power. Um, Even dating sites now, I haven't dated probably for over 30 years, but I know sites there, you can look at people's pictures, and you have the ultimate power to either refuse them or to appreciate them just with a swipe of the finger. And what I will tell you is, we talked about developing habits early, and you might say, oh, you don't have to worry about toddlers. Well, you might, because if you look at the toys that kids are playing with now, if they're not actual sort of pseudo tablets, they are stuffed tablets. They are stuffed phones that they play with. And I was actually giving this presentation to a group of parents, and there was a toddler who was in a stroller with a stuffed phone, mimicking, already getting it. And I will tell you, there is also a kinesthetic element to swiping. There is something about touching and interacting and being empowered. My dog has a stuffed tablet. My dog knows about social media. So, you know, as you know, good as these things are to provide a vehicle for social interaction, there is something that is behind it. If you think about YouTube, I remember YouTube was just a great place to watch videos, but now everything is monetized and situations are created to drive people to it. Things like Instagram. I was talking to my niece and my nephew. Now, if you don't know me, I work at a large Research One public university campus. I work at UC San Diego, and I was very proud to take my niece and nephew to the campus. And I asked them, I looked back from my front seat, and I said, what would you guys like to be when you grow up? Hoping they'd say, we want to go to school with you, uncle. We want to, I want to be a doctor, or I want to be a sociologist. My nephew said, I want to be an unboxer. And I thought an unboxer was the opposite of being a boxer. I thought, so you want to be a boxing umpire? What is an unboxer? Somebody who takes the gloves off? Apparently, there is so much joy to be had by receiving things, as we know from the validation loop, that people record videos of them opening things as if it were, the holidays, opening things and showing them to you so you can live vicariously through them. And I just thought, okay, but that is a career that you can make a living out of opening stuff, and people will send you free stuff to open. So that was alarmed. I was a bit alarmed there. My niece is a brilliant artist. She is incredibly creative. And I said, okay, all right, now I've got this. All right. And I said, what would you like to be? And she said, I want to be an influencer. I said, you want to be a what? Because I didn't even know that this was a job. But, she talked about how many followers that she would like to have. Now, interestingly enough, when you're talking about Instagram, we talked about Facebook and we talked about friendship. Now, think about when we talk about Instagram, we talk about followers, which is something different altogether. And I said, well, what does an influencer do? And it came to me that there would be a lot of pressure to always come up with something new. And you can imagine for those kids who are perfectionists or, maybe, inwardly focused, what happens when you have 500 friends on Friday and on Monday you have 498 and you begin to obsess about that? So again, from a kid who grew up in the 70s and 80s, this was just absolutely mind-boggling. And we know that just having one of these around causes brain drain, which is interesting because the world's knowledge is in here. How would it cause brain drain? Well, because we can't live in the present. If you think about your life with social media, you're usually thinking about what you've done in the past, what you've posted, how people are reacting, or what you're going to do in the future. Nobody's stopping to smell the roses, even if they are a filter on Instagram. We also we know from brain compatible learning that there's no such thing as multitasking. You may remember I said, how many of you are multitaskers? All the hands went up and I said, no, you're not. And he said, yes, we are. Had a big debate about that. But this compels us to do many things at the same time, and none of them holistically and none of them well. It leads to things like anxiety and depression and impulsivity, hyperactivity. Delayed gratification is no more. If you can have next day delivery, and if you can buy it now, so there goes all pretense of delayed gratification. And I thought, okay, well, this may be a high school thing. This may be an adolescent thing. Actually, it is most prevalent among college students, which is a great worry to me. All right, so That's shopping, and a little bit of social media. Now let's talk about gaming. Now, when I was playing video games way back when, my video game was called Pong, and you actually had to go somewhere to play it, and you had to have rolls of quarters to be able to play it. And it was just like Wimbledon. There were two lines and a little dot bounce between them, and it was like tennis. Things today are very, very different. What are some of the good things? Because there are always two sides to every story. Some of the good things that come out of gaming. Well, we know that it improves certain cognitive functions, things like multidimensional thinking. When you are looking at a plane, you're able to think in multiple dimensions. Better hand-eye coordination. Even way back then, when we were playing, Donkey Kong and things like that, our hand-eye coordination became a little bit better. Quick thinking, solving problems in the moment, accuracy works very well. Dexterity, usually an elevated mood because it's distracting you from other things. It's an escape. And incremental intelligence, this idea when you think of video games as levels, and I think we talked about that not too long ago, you begin to have a developmental understanding and growth mindset, this idea of resilience. Okay, so I may have perished in the game, but I can come back to life and I'm going to attack it again. Some of the negatives, preoccupation and obsession, where you just keep going back and back and back and back until you get where you need to be. Sometimes health problems, increased levels of aggression, um, exposure to repeated acts of violence and related locus of control. We used to call this in the days of TV desensitization, where we don't really distinguish just how awful these things are. Suffering relationships in so much that it takes you away from other people, social isolation, difficulty distinguishing between fantasy and reality in some cases, and decreased academic performance. And you can imagine why. If you're spending all of your time on gaming, you're not spending a whole lot of time with schoolwork. Now, this is something I don't understand. And I have gone to sources, I have gone to younger family members, and I've said, explain this because I do not understand. I thought Fortnite was 2 weeks. And the reason that I started asking about this because my nephew from the same car trip, it was around the holidays, and I said to him, what would you like for Christmas? And he said, I want skins. And there were several thoughts that went through my mind. Is one is, is he some sort of a serial killer, or is he collecting animal skins? So he painstakingly explained to me that skins are sort of the personalities that you wear in the gaming world. And all I can tell you about this game is apparently there's a lot of killing and a lot of dancing. I don't know how the two things connect, but again, I'm aging myself. I'm dating myself. But what do we know about gaming? We know that there are differentiated impacts of genre. So if you are doing puzzle games versus first-person shooters, it's very different in terms of concentration and executive function. We know that there are differentiated impacts in terms of confidence, competence, and mastery, which video games are great at because you take a risk, you become competent, you become confident. It's what we like to see also in the classroom. What we tried to do, and what I've tried to get my niece and nephew to do, is we'd say, look, if you are interested in playing these games, wouldn't you like to design these games? And through Sally Ride Science Academy, and Dr. Ward, I think, knows this very well, we offer a lot of opportunities for video game design and coding. And we think about this as maybe the first step on a professional pathway. And we know that there's differentiated impacts on the brain and on morality and empathy moving forward. Now, one of the things that I've come to realize is that if your child or your young adult is having experiencing sort of addictive tendencies, they're not going to come to tell you. Last time we talked about adolescent behavior and we said they're not going to come and volunteer. The help seeking behavior is not a thing among teenagers for a variety of reasons, but most of all in assertion of independence. So what are some of the things that you can look for? Preoccupation with previous online activity or anticipation over new activity. This is not exclusive to teenagers. My wife my wife has been banned from Twitter so many times. I don't know what she's doing, but she will always think about what she said. She doesn't hold herself in the moment. Her executive function is gone. But she will go on a rampage and she'll always think, why did I do that? Why did I do that? I need to get back on. So certainly a level of obsession there. Using technology or the internet increasingly to maintain existing levels or new levels of satisfaction. When we talked about addiction, this is really the kind of thing that we're talking about. Feeling the need to respond immediately to postings, tweets, etc. Not holding back, not pausing for a minute, not, as my father would say, count to 10. Um, and it really has impacted our availability. I remember when I wanted to contact a professor, I would have to go up and see the professor's assistant, and they would leave a message. Maybe the professor would call me, before the end of the semester. Maybe they wouldn't, and I'd have to come during office hours, and I'd have to wait. Now, if I get an email at 3 in the morning and I don't respond by 6, I feel bad. So we are not only responding immediately to things like postings and tweets that you might intuit, but also to things like email. Um, when we all went remote, there is a very fine line between working at home and living at work. And we have to dance that very delicately. Staying online much more than was originally intended. Everybody does it. You cannot just go and check. You're going to go and check, and then you're going to go down a rabbit hole. Anybody who's been on Wikipedia knows exactly. Anybody who's been on IMDb looking at a movie knows exactly what I mean. You just go down a rabbit hole, and 3 days later, you come out with a full beard and go, what happened to the time? Restlessness, moodiness, irritability when attempting to scale back on technology use. I remember my grandfather was a 4-pack-a-day smoker. When he quit, this is what he was like. Um, Using technology as an escape from feelings of helplessness, guilt, anxiety, or depression. It is the ultimate escape, or to avoid actual human contact. Feeling anxiety when away from a device. What is the scariest thing in the world today? To reach down in your pockets and go, oh no, oh no, 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 no. Because our whole lives are on that phone. This runs my life. This tells me if I've had enough steps. This tells me if I've slept enough. This gives me my mail. This thing even turns on the lights for me if I ask. So anxiety on away from a device. Not being able to control, cut back, or stop, that feels very addictive to me. When you jeopardize significant relationships, professional or educational opportunities. Again, we tell adolescents, please, please be careful of what you put out there, because one of these days when you are out of medical school and you're done with your residencies and you are going to be working at a major metropolitan hospital, they're going to pull that thing that you posted and it will catch up with you. Being defensive, attempting to rationalize behaviors when confronted, again, feels very addictive. Euphoria when connected, that just joy that you feel when you get onto LinkedIn and you see that somebody has followed you or somebody has liked what you've posted. Sleeplessness, not shutting off or shutting down. What do I mean by that? You can shut this off, but your brain keeps going. So I will reference my wife's Twitter battles, where she was fighting with somebody, and she said, "I'm just going to put it down," and she just stared at the ceiling all night, growling, because she could not shut this down. Being dishonest about usage, especially when confronted. Anxiety, shame, or depression, again, feeling very addictive, and withdrawing, neglecting one's pleasurable activities. Now these days, novelty is back in the real world. And I think all of us would just love to, if we remember how to drive and how to socialize and Remember that you can't mute people in real life. People will go back. But I remember my nephew who loved to play sports, stopped playing sports because he wanted to be in online competitive gaming. So 2 times ago, we talked about flow, and we talked about flow as the fine balance between skill and challenge, where creativity and motivation make their homes. This is the neurochemistry of persistence that happens in the flow channel you see here. What's the difference? I've overlaid the validation loop atop it, and you can see how the validation loop and these designed experiences by these types of companies actually play on what we know about neurochemistry and actually play on what we know about flow. And you can see how we go through the worry and the anxiety of not having something, the arousal, the interest that we experience when we find it, and the sense of satisfaction that we have when we get it, the sense of relaxation and boredom when we actually get the thing and the thrill is gone, to quote BB King. Um, this idea that you can easily superimpose it. So these are very much designed experiences. So here's some things to think about. It's for those who are more inwardly focused, those who are may not have social graces. It's easier to be behind the screen to create social relationships. We know that there are extreme and varied offerings online versus school. So if you're not able to find it in the real world, chances are you're going to get your needs attended to online, both cognitive and affective. It is a wild, wide world out there. Now, when I think of vacations, what do adults like to do when they go on vacation? Well, I can tell you for people my age, we like to go to a place where we can sit on a beach and just watch the water and do nothing because we are overwhelmed by information all the time. But when we talk about young kids and we talk about young adults, it's a little bit different. They want to do this and that and this and that. It's boring to sit on the beach. They want to fill the void. And where better place to fill the void than online? Because you can get anything and everything you want in any way that you want it. So there's ongoing nonstop activity that keeps you going, keeps you moving forward. You can do something different. You can be someone different. If you feel as though you're boring or mundane, it's a great place to be whoever you want. It's almost like the first year of college away. You can recreate yourself, and that's part of the problem is you really don't know who you are interacting with online at times. Compensating online for what cannot be found in the real world. That becomes a substitute and later an addiction. Now, if you think about Instagram, and you look at these pictures, people don't just snap a picture of their dog or their dinner. What they do is they stage it and they put filters on it, and they have the dog, looking forlorn or don't look at me, look past me, and they snap a picture. And they're remarkably curated, and people become very envious and that whole thing of fear of missing out. But what do we do when we see these remarkable works of art? Do we study them and do we appreciate them? No, we go more, new, more, better. And that is the way our brain naturally functions. We love novelty, and we love to engage, but we don't now, we're going much too fast. Social stagnation in the real world, misconceptions about friendships, and we talked about what that looks like, and a need for immediate and varied gratification. We don't withhold anymore. We don't wait anymore because we don't have to wait anymore. So here's some advice for all of you who are trying to figure out what to do. Now, these are designed addictive experiences. You have to retrain gradually. No quitting cold turkey. The worst thing you can do is say, I'm going to take this away from you, because you know what? Your kids, if there's an age difference between you and your kids, they are much, much, much smarter in this way. I remember that's what happened to my nephew. They took away his tablet, they took away his phone, they took away his Wii and everything else. He disappeared into his room. It turns out that he was able to access social media through his video games. I didn't know that. His parents didn't know that. We're all the same age. And really, that is not a good solution. When we look at some of the things that are going on, you attend to causes as well as symptoms. Usually what you are seeing is the surface. Get to the root of the problem. Technology may be a means to an end. Follow your children and interact where they are. That does not mean friend requests and all of that does not mean that you have to make yourself look like a horse on Snapchat and that kind of thing, but just be aware. And sometimes older siblings can help. Most important thing, protect sleep. Sleep is absolutely essential, especially during adolescence. Keep the devices at bay, or at least turn off the notifications. You're going to use it as an alarm, fine. And don't assume the worst. One of the things that we always suggest, especially over the last few years or so, um, there's nobody out there fact checking the internet. There's nobody saying, okay, this is passable. It moves on. And the thing about the internet that is amazing is no matter how moronic or inane or insipid an idea that you have, you can go online and you can find a group of people who agree with it. So you are sort of reinforcing this idea of an echo chamber or speaking to the choir, and we don't think critically anymore. We're not critical consumers or producers of information. So we say to start young, and we talk about imbuing a healthy dose of skepticism about who's creating the message, why has it been created, and for whom is it intended? Is it credible or is it made to look credible? What's left out or implied? So if you think of, in education, we talked about the elements of depth and complexity. This is really what we're talking about. So is Uncle Billy's blog, does that have the same credibility as an established news agency? We really don't stop to look at sources. We just sort of gravitate to those things that we believe. And if it looks credible, if it looks presentable, then we will believe it. So a healthy dose of skepticism. Technology is ubiquitous and pervasive. So when we talk about some kinds of addicts, we talk about alcoholism, we talk about drug addiction, you can avoid places where alcohol and drugs are. You can avoid bars, you can avoid liquor stores, you can avoid parties. If you're a shopping addict, you can avoid shopping malls. You can't avoid technology. I will bet you that at E3, Dr. Ward can probably attest that there are carts full of technology. Technology is there. So it's not about avoidance, it's about finding a sense of balance. It's also about epiphany-based solutions. And what I mean by that is no matter how wonderful a parent you are, no matter how incredible a caregiver you are, your kids are miles and zip codes ahead of, um, of, of you in terms of this. So when we're talking about cutting back, we're talking about a solution that has to come from within. You know how it is because I remember how I was when I was a teenager. If my parents said water is wet, I would say no, it's not. I it doesn't matter what it was. But if I had the idea myself, that made a lot of difference. My father was a psychologist, which explains a lot about me. But one of the things he was absolutely marvelous about is making me think things were my idea when they clearly were not. Um, Problems and challenges have the same or greater impacts online as in real life. I remember my nephew was upset because a gaming friend of his in another state, they had a falling out. And his father said to him, you haven't even met that kid. What are you so worried about? He's not even in the same state as you. But kids today don't make those distinctions, and the problems are the same online as they are in real life, and there is a tendency for kids to suffer alone and suffer in silence, especially when we're looking at things like cyberbullying. One of the things that you can do is model balance yourself, be a good example. Think about how different types of technologies impact different types of people. Now, one of the great things, if anything good came out of the pandemic, is that we can now go and find novelty in real life. We used to go to find novelty online, but at some point, kids are going to get sick of Fortnite, they're going to get sick of Snapchat, and they're going to go out into the real world. So if you're not meeting needs in the real world, they may meet them in the virtual one. Again, it takes all of us together. Parents, you have part of the picture. Practitioners, you have part of the picture, and working together, we have the full puzzle. So working together is important, as is mindfulness, which are strategies that help people live in the now. And we have a lot of resources. But above everything, above all else, above the tricks and the neuroscience, it's so very important that you love them and support them, and they know that you are there for them. That is the ultimate way to attend to these. So what I want to be able to do is now open this up to questions. I hope I did not take up too much of your time. Hey, I think we just made it just under the wire. I feel like I've been just talking a million miles a minute, but please, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free.
Thank you so much. We want to use this with all of our scholars as we begin the school year. You touched upon a number of really good points, beyond just the video gaming, right? But all the addictions that come with these devices and the purpose behind them. So as we reimagine education, which we're beginning to do, we also have to think about how people are buying for our time and doing all of these different things to get our attention. And so that's another component that we have to really think about with our kiddos this coming year. And one of the things that we're going to do in the afternoon when they have not free time, but what we call choice time, is the choice to totally detach. And that is put their computers away, put everything away, and just sit there and do nothing, really.
Yes.
Right? And so we want that to be part of the day.
That is, Dr. Ward, that's fantastic, because when we talk about mindfulness, it does not mean you have to sit and meditate and follow a guide. It's just being connected to the present and the ability to sort of pull yourself out of the matrix, even if it's for a few minutes, and detach and refresh and center. It makes all of the difference in the world. So I think that is a phenomenal strategy.
Thank you. Thank you. You have just confirmed that we must do so.
Consider yourself confirmed.
Thank you. Thank you.